Before we start today, we just want to acknowledge to each and every one of you, we want to thank you. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This is the 100th episode that we have done of this show. And we are extremely grateful to you for going on this journey with us. Yeah. It has been a fascinating, educational, hard journey at times in terms of getting the content, but such a wonderful learning experience as well.
Yeah, I just can't believe that it's been 100 episodes. I just feel like we just started this the other day and we were like on episode 1, and I just cannot believe we are at 100 already. So super excited, super blown away, and super thankful. As Rich mentioned to you guys, we can't tell you how thankful we are from all of you guys around the world. And, you know, it's exciting because, you know, we've come on this journey, you and I, and like you said, it's been fun and it's been really hard. It's been really, really hard to do what we're doing. And you're the guys that let us keep moving on and keep pushing us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to really thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I mean, you know, Eric and I both, I think I can speak for him when I say that we both are committed to education. We believe that for an artist to have success today, in today's market, for you to have a career, you need to be educated. If this is going to be your life, if this is going to be how you, ladies and gentlemen, choose to make your living, you have to know what you're doing. It's not just a fantasy. It's not just a dream. It's committing the time, the energy, and so forth, of everything that it takes to make that happen. So we're very, very grateful. Here's to the next 100.
Yeah, I was just going to say, here's to the next 100.
Yeah.
And on with today's episode.
On today's podcast, we sit down with acclaimed composer and producer Simon Franglen. Known for his work on blockbusters like Titanic and Avatar, Simon takes us through his incredible journey from mixing gigs at age 15 to collaborating with legends like Quincy Jones and David Foster. We dive deep into the challenges of scoring for film, including the landmark achievements of the beautiful Titanic score and the muscular action music for Avatar, The Way of Water. Discover how Simon integrates authentic cultural elements into the futuristic world of Pandora and what it's like working alongside James Cameron. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we invite you to dive into the world of film scoring and record production with our esteemed guest, Simon Franglen. From his early days working with the legendary Trevor Horn and his time at SARM Studios to the creation of iconic scores for Avatar and Titanic, Simon shares the intricacies and inspirations behind his most legendary projects. We'll explore how Simon tackled the musical challenges of Titanic, including the surprising origins of the hit song My Heart Will Go On, and how he blended cultural authenticity with futuristic elements in Avatar, The Way of Water. Plus, listen as he discusses the immersive sound project with Pink Floyd that pushed technical boundaries. Simon also gives valuable advice for aspiring film composers and reveals the films and documentaries that have inspired his storied career. This is one conversation filled with creativity and insights that you don't want to miss. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes, or save with our discount discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Hi, this is Ryan Dusick from Maroon 5, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is none other than the great composer Simon Franglen. This was a fascinating conversation on so many levels, Eric.
Yep.
I thought. I mean, it's got themes of, commitment, of drive, of what it actually takes.
Excellence.
Yes. And an understanding of the creative process, not only of yourself, but also of those who you work with. I mean, first of all, he talked a lot about, right from the get-go, what got me about this interview with Simon was how he talked about adapting to change, his move from producing to programming. And what this indicates is this is something interesting because I think a lot of people, you were always asked, like, how do I start my producing career? Well, you start by doing it. Right. Like going out and finding artists to produce. Record companies aren't just going to knock on your door and say, here's, an artist for you. You have to show them. And this was a way that I thought he very, very much, he went from the whole idea of, producing initially to programming. And it indicated to me the necessity to adapt your skills according to changes in the business. And then he eventually talked about moving to America,
right,
where he worked with legendary people.
Yeah.
Talking about working with Trevor Horn and working with David Foster and working on all of these incredibly big hit records,
right?
Including ultimately the Celine
Dion,
Dion, My
yeah.
Heart Will Go On, and several other massive hit records which he spoke of.
Yeah, one of the other areas that I thought was very important, and we've talked about this in the past with, maybe on the music supervisor side, is storytelling through music, and how different thematic approaches and scoring indicate the importance of storytelling and theme association in music composition. We talk about on one side, when we talk about how artists should not be writing for, you should just write from your heart. Well, in this case, when you're a composer, you are writing to the piece of what you're looking at. So it's almost like that's your canvas and you're writing to that.
Your work is in service of the film.
Exactly. And so it's an interesting take on how he talks about that approach and how important it is, like what you said, to serve that scene or to serve the mood of what that scene is creating, and how important that role music plays in that.
Oh, without question. And, when you listen to this interview, you'll get, the depth of commitment and commitment to excellence that everyone involved in the production, starting with the great James Cameron, has toward the work.
And with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Simon Franglen.
Simon, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
We're thrilled to have you. We always like to start these conversations off with the question, when in your life did you know that music was going to be your professional career path?
It's simple in my case. I wrote to the BBC when I was 13 years old and said, how do I become a record producer? So it's the only thing I'm any good at. So it's been easy for me. I've always wanted to do this. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. I sort of expected to either start with records, but film music was going to be where I wanted to head up.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. So you always knew, even as a teenager, that was your interest.
I walked into my schools. They had a small theater. It had a mixing desk. It had a tape recorder. It had all the things that we were. And I looked in there and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It was as simple as that. And it was the only thing I wanted to do. And I started mixing sound commercially. I was making money, but not very much. When I was 15 years old, I started mixing gigs in London, and it went on from there.
Simon, this is Eric. It's so exciting to have you on the show. I wanted to ask you, at a very early age, you started working with renowned record producer Trevor Horn at SARM Studios as a programmer. What did you learn working with him?
It was a very special time. At that point, he was the biggest record producer in the world. He'd just come off the 90215 Yes album. My first thing I worked on was the Big Generator album, which was the next Yes album. So I went in from literally working in the tiniest studio you can possibly imagine. Somebody had seen me working with the very early music computers and said to Trevor and to his wife Jill Sinclair, said, "You should hire Simon." So I went in there, knew nothing, and suddenly I read the manuals for the music computer I was working on, which is a thing called the Synclavier. I read them over Christmas. They agreed to hire me on December the 18th, and on January the 6th I started, and on January the 8th I was working with Yes, who were at that point the biggest band in the world. So it was a real baptism by fire. And what I learned more than anything, I think, was it was incredibly exciting to be there, but I learned that the difference between good and great, I think that was the thing I would come away with from Trevor more than anything.
Yeah, Trevor is he's one of my favorite producers. I mean, just all the work that he did, obviously with Yes, the Buggles, and just Seal. The Seal albums to me are just masterpieces. So that must have been a great experience for you.
Oh, it really was. I mean, I got to work on Frankie Goes to Hollywood stuff, which also meant that I spent time with Steve Lipson, who was a phenomenal producer and engineer, and we've ended up both in films as well later on in our careers.
You left to become a producer on your own, and this was during a very, very creative time for UK artists, musically speaking. What did that time producing records teach you, going out on your own?
I think at that time I thought I knew everything. I mean, I was in my 20s, therefore I did know everything. And we have that, arrogance of youth, I suppose, which is what it's important to have. I think I loved the excitement and the challenge of making records then. We were trying to break new boundaries always. And I think that's the thing that I carry with me now.
Simon, a few years later, you left for America and initially stopped being a producer and went back to being a programmer, where you work with some giant artists on some massive hit singles. What prompted this change, and what was the period like for you?
I was working in records in Britain. I was a producer, as you said. I was writing and producing records. And I got the Synclavier phoned me up one day and said, "Look, would you work with this American engineer and producer?" And I said, "No, I don't do that anymore." And they said, "Well, he's worked with some great people. He's worked with some Michael Jackson. He did like We Are the World and so on." And I said, "Okay." So I went and worked with this guy called Humberto Gatica, who was a fabulous engineer. I learned a huge amount from him. We were in what was called a residential studio those days, where we all hang out in a beautiful country house in Oxfordshire in England. And he said to me, "You should come to America. Nobody works the way that you do." And I looked at what was going on in England. I went out to America, and it was pretty evident to me that, when I said to you earlier that I thought I knew everything, I suddenly came face to face with the fact that there was so much more to learn. And I went back to my day job, which was programming, because it was just so exciting to work with these amazing musicians, these amazing producers and these amazing artists. I mean, if you get to hang out with Quincy Jones, that's worth going back to your day job for.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And you also worked with David Foster and, Michael Jackson. I mean, you worked on some enormous records during that time.
Yeah, it was pretty special. It's fair to say that there was a chunk in the 90s where most of the records I worked on tended to be hits. It was very exciting. And yes, David was a huge influence on me. I would work with him so much. We were seeing each other more than our wives and girlfriends at the time, I think it's fair to say. And that meant all of those records in the 90s, like the Whitneys, I did, Bodyguard and Celine and Tony Braxton and stuff like that. It was all very, very exciting.
Yeah, it was. It was a very exciting time, and I remember that period well. But it was also at this time that you started to do a lot of work with renowned composers such as the great John Barry and Howard Shore and James Horner, which resulted in your work on Titanic. And at the time, due to the massive overages and very public delays in the production, I don't think anyone expected that film would do well. I remember the enormous amount of negative publicity because of all of those factors. And you had a lot of challenges on that film, and I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges that you faced in, working on Titanic and how you guys solved them.
I think people don't understand that we had no money when we were doing Titanic. I was working with a guy called Alan Silvestri, his agent at the time on a film called Contact. And his agent was the same agent for another composer called James Horner, who I'd never met and never worked with. And they said to me, would you go and see James? There's a problem. They had a very small budget. And one of my skills was that I could sort of make these music computers sing and feel like orchestras and live instruments. I could do creative, unusual things. I'd been known for the fact that I would push these things to the edge. So strange things like I'd done with Howard Shore. I'd done Seven, where I was the guy who did all the crunchy, nasty stuff rather than the sort of, and with this one, there wasn't enough money for much orchestra in the score. So they hired me to help James create a sort of a hybrid score. And the first thing I got to was a VHS cassette, I think it was, of the sinking in Titanic, the point where you see the ship going up and you see those enormous propellers come out of the ground. And I looked at it and thought, this is astonishing. I've got to work on this. And I agreed a deal to do this. I also had to, part of this, I had to record everything because there was no money for an engineer at the time. So there was me, James Horner, and another legend of synthesizers, a guy called Ian Underwood. We were all stuffed into a tiny studio, and I called up other friends in equipment manufacturers and asked to borrow equipment off them so I could record the score because we had so little money.
I think that's mind-blowing that, one would think Titanic, obviously because of the aftermath of it, but didn't realize that there was no budget behind it. So that's something that I didn't even know, because you would think something on that scale would have like an unlimited budget, but, realizing that it didn't, it's amazing what you guys were able to do.
And that film, one of the problems was that the delays on that
technology,
film production-wise caused immense amount of overages. So money was not only very tight, but they had to keep spending money at that time. And it was divided between two studios, I think, at the time, Paramount and 20th, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was the situation where Paramount had a maximum amount that they could that they'd agreed to. And then everything over was Fox's. And so there was quite a lot of screaming, I remember, going on when we were working. And we had no money. I mean, really no money, to the point where when you hear the synthesizer textures that we were creating for the score, a lot of them were there because, for instance, the vocal sound that when there's a Take Her to Sea, Mr. Murdoch, which is one of the famous cues where the ship leaves port, you hear this a vocal texture that goes on there. That was meant to be the Harlem Boys Choir, but we had no money, so it stuck. We didn't have enough money to hire the Harlem Boys Choir. There were things like that we just went through, and while the screaming was going on, we tried to get the music done. And there would be this tiny studio where we were. There would be Ian Underwood at one end, James Horner in the middle, and then a tiny gap, and then me on the right. And in that tiny gap would be a lawn chair where Jim Cameron would come and listen to the music.
I understand from things that I've read over the years that the song My Heart Will Go On was originally never meant, it was never part of the thing that was planned from the beginning, but that Horner, I think, wasn't it, you and Horner got Celine to do it unbeknownst to Jim Cameron, and then laid it on him when it was like recorded already? Is that the story behind it?
There is a longer story, but it starts with a previous song for a previous film that Celine had demoed up, or sung for. She was meant to do it. In the end, it didn't work out. It didn't end up in the film. And James Horner had always remembered her voice because I'd worked with Celine on dozens of records with David Foster, for instance, and I'd also produced some songs for Celine. And I knew her very, very well. And it came to this point where James showed me a piano sketch. I still have the sketch somewhere in my house, which was the song that he'd written with Will Jennings, which was based on the themes from the film. And he said, do you think this would work for Celine? And I said, Yeah, absolutely it would. And he said, could you make it sound like one of Celine's records? And I said, well, I do that. That's a regular part of what I do. So I demoed up a version, which is pretty well the version that we hear in the film, with a couple of changes. And we did it. We did a demo version. And at this point, Celine was in New York. She agreed to sing it. And James flew to New York overnight. I had to stay in LA because I was finishing up other stuff with the film. He went to New York. She recorded the guide vocals, which were on there were 6 tracks of vocals, if I remember rightly. Brought them back. I compiled the vocal, and and I mixed a version of it that James Horner carried around on a cassette, waiting for the moment to be able to play it to Jim. And so he didn't play it to him until there was a point where he said, "What about this?" And then Jim, said, "Wow." And obviously the rest of the ship sank and everything else was great.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, and it went on to, it's one of the biggest hits of the 20th century.
All time.
Yeah. It's, I mean, were you guys surprised at the magnitude of the success of that song or not?
Yes, I think we were all, we were used to film songs being at the end of a film and doing well. I mean, I'd been involved in enough film songs that had, there was that period when every song had a major artist singing at the end. And I'd worked on dozens probably of those at the end as end title credit songs that with major singers, including Celine. I mean, I did Because You Love Me, which David Foster produced. I worked on that. That was off so there were plenty of other songs that Celine had done for the end of films. I think the thing was that this was why it worked was that the theme, first of all, was wound into the score. So that when you heard the 4 minutes at the end of the film, it was like an encapsulation of everything you'd seen before, of the love story between Jack and Rose, of between the tragedy of what gone on with the people on the Titanic. And you'd been primed throughout the whole film where you'd hear in da 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 da, and then it would go somewhere else. You'd hear bits and pieces of the song, but it was never all put together until the very last thing that you hear. And so you come to this end title and you are given this beautiful voice that Celine had with this beautiful vocal. And she tells the story of the film effectively. I think that's why I always feel it's like this memory of what had gone past.
Simon, you scored the Avatar sequel, The Way of Water. Horner's original score set a unique tone. But for the sequels, Cameron wanted a more thematic approach with a muscular direction for action music. How did you balance Horner's original score with Cameron's desire for a more thematic, muscular direction in the music for The Way of Water?
I think the way that we looked at it is that we wanted to homage what James had done, but this was a new film. It had a new direction, and I needed to carry some of the DNA with me because that was an essential part of, we're in a series. It's like a Star Wars film. You can't have the Star Wars films without carrying some of those things. And so what we decided was there were certain themes from A1 that we felt were essential. So whenever we saw Jake and Neytiri that was together, I used a theme from Avatar 1. But he wanted something, he felt that there were things that he could do better in terms of Avatar 2, in terms of the way that he was approaching it, which was something where we had tunes that were associated with characters and were associated with feelings in a way that Avatar 1 had been more of a vibe, that's not quite the right word, a textural score, some fabulous melodies, but they weren't associated with specific characters at specific times. And an example of that would be, for instance, the Darth Vader theme, where we always know when Darth Vader comes on stage, on screen, the dun 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 dun, the Imperial March comes on. Now, remember, the Imperial March actually doesn't appear until the second Star Wars film. It wasn't in the very first one. It came in second. So it is possible for new themes to appear and become memorable, And Jim Cameron said to me, I think we need a theme for the family. I think we need something that is associated with the family. So that was the first thing I needed to write. And that came from the song chord, the thing we see when we watch Avatar: Way of Water, we see Neytiri singing the story of her family. And so there needed to be a song for that. And that's where I came with the family theme. And then there were other themes that were needed. So we needed a theme for the new reef, for the sea people. We needed something for the big whale, Payakan. And also we needed our version of the Imperial March. We needed a baddies theme. There hadn't been a baddies theme in Avatar 1. And so what I hope I did was blend what we had from A1 and take it, I followed, the path was laid, and then I continued it into the new direction. I hope I remembered James, but also brought something fresh to it, because I am a different composer to James.
Yeah, precisely. And, in doing research for this conversation with you, I read that Cameron was very deeply involved in shaping the music from early on, insisting, I believe, that you read the scripts before composing and providing detailed feedback on the score. And you have said that the projects I've done for Jim Cameron have been the most satisfying musically. And so our question to you, Simon, is what makes them so creatively fulfilling?
Imagine you have somebody who cares desperately about every note you write and cares desperately about every frame that is on the screen. We have this amazing thing that goes on in the Avatar family, that there are 3,500 people who work on Avatar. And it's like an enormous cone filter, like a coffee filter that goes down to one man. And that's Jim. And Jim won't allow anything through that he doesn't believe in, that he doesn't feel is right. And for me, having somebody who absolutely cares that much and is that engaged in what I'm doing is fabulous. And because it's possible to get people who just expect the music to be phoned in. They don't particularly engage with it. To have somebody who really cares that much and challenges you is very exciting. I find he pushes you to give your best. And what you end up with is a Jim Cameron score. But you end up with a Jim Cameron score that you have refined everything to the nth degree. I mean, this is one of those things where I've been working on the Fire and Ash, the next one, which will come out next December. And I've already been working on that for quite a while. And that same level of care and that same level of detail is true now, and we're a year away from it coming out.
And how does that process typically work for you, Simon? Do you get like dailies that come in and then you start writing to that, or how does that process work?
It's slightly different with Avatar because remember, we have a process where the shooting is done with the actors, with the dots on their suits and so on. Mm-hmm. And then they create a thing called a template. And the template is like a rough render. And that is edited by Jim and Steve Rifkin and the other editors till they get an assembly that they feel is right. And then it goes off to be rendered by Weta, who are the people in New Zealand. That can take up to a year to render. So that the actual edit is already roughly locked in. I mean, well, pretty detailedly locked in. So once I get a locked edit, it's something I can write to because it's not going to change that much. And so I've been writing to scenes, and then eventually those scenes get combined together into reels, and then we'll eventually have the whole thing as a film when we mix it.
Hey insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things. But for people that are out there like our audience that don't have necessarily any direction to go would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the song songs that
Absolutely.
incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
You know, are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
You know, and it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Rich. And, you know, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, you know, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That we start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call. Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he edits as he goes along.
Yeah, in fact, the edit, he can reshoot after he's edited. This
Really?
is what people don't quite understand. Yes, because what happens is you can edit the template, so you get to edit the scene, but the scene is a rough rendering of what's going on. They then, in Weta, render the whole 3D space. So he can say sometime later, you know what? You know how that camera is over your shoulder and it's got a 24mm lens? What about if I had it overhead 500 feet up and it had a zoom lens instead? He can completely, and he can move the camera around. He can reshoot the scene later on because the render is of the whole 3D space and all of the light in it. And so this means that I can work to a scene, but it may look very different if he's decided to reshoot something later on.
And then you sit with, and then once you get that completed sequence done, you sit with James, and then he approves it, yay or nay, or gives you direction, or how does that part of that process work?
Oh yeah, that's the point where you sit down, you play it to him. He likes me to play him the music in a preview theater, in a big theater, so that we can so he feels like it's in the cinema, and he will watch it and listen to it, and he will give me very detailed notes. And he comes up with really good ideas. I mean, he will say to me that he can't talk about music. I think that's wrong. I think he does it very well. But he will often say to me, you know, that piece of music there, what about if you put it 8 seconds earlier? And so because of the way that we work, I will take a full mix session with me so that I can completely manipulate any of the music that he's listening to. He's not getting like a stereo that he can listen to. He's got the whole thing, and I can just make changes on the fly,
Wow.
with him. And that he'll say, he'll say, no, I don't like that bit. Or he'll say the first half of this is rubbish. The second half is great, but what if you did this? And then I will try and make many of those changes on the fly with him and say, well, what about if, I would try and tweak while I'm with him. And that's part of the way that we like to work. I then go away and will try and reflect all the comments he's made in, revisions. And there can be a load of revisions. But the good thing about this is that there are only two people I have to please. I have to please myself, and then I have to please Jim. And if it may take me, I don't know, 7 or 8 times for me to please myself. I remember when I did on Way of Water, there's a scene where the kids jump in the water the first time. And it's the first time we go underwater, so it's very, very important within the film. I think I did 7 versions of it or something like that before I was ready to play it to Jim. I'd do it, I think this is the best thing ever. I'd go to sleep, I'd come back the next day and throw it all away and start again. And that's part of what we do, is we have to be critical with ourselves as well.
Yeah, the level of, just the bar that James sets alone just, I guess, makes you want to raise that bar with him.
If it's any consolation, there are visual effects shots that are visual effects version 435.
Wow. Unbelievable. I mean, and yet, and you can see why those films have such strong impact. So, yeah, it's fascinating to hear. When do you see the final film? Do you get to see the final film? Like, did you see Way of the Water before it came out, or do you see it at the theater when it's all released?
Oh, yeah, no, we get reviews where we're working as we're going along. There'll often be reviews. I've already seen a cut of 3, for instance.
Right.
There is a cut that exists, so I've seen that. It will evolve quite significantly since the version that I've seen.
Right.
But what we do is we will have the various different team heads. Obviously, I'm the head of the music team, and then there are people who are the sound effects team. There are people who are doing dialogue. There's also all the visual effects people of different, so they're all, we will all sit down with Jim and we will go to the movies and we will play the movie down. And for instance, Jim requires that there is popcorn because he needs to feel like he's going to the movie so that he's an audience member. And one of the things that he will say to me, and I think it's one of his super strengths, is I'm the audience. You're playing. I want to know why I'm spending $20 in the cinema. And I think that people forget how important that is. He really believes that he wants to give value for money, but he also wants to believe that somebody would like to go and see his movie. And he puts himself in the seat of, an average Joe. And I think that's one of the skills that he has. He really does connect with the audience.
Yeah, he most certainly does. I mean, just historically, just when you think of his
body of
films,
work,
the body of work, it's astonishing. I mean, Terminator 2 is one of my all-time favorite films, and I'm not necessarily an action or a science fiction, but that particular one, the level of innovation, the level of creativity and thought, and I guess, well, innovation is the word, because he did things in that movie visually that had never ever been seen before, and it's just it's astonishing.
I think there's something else which I think people don't pay enough attention to in Jim's films, which is that at the heart of them, there is always a very solid love story or relationship story that absolutely connects you to the characters on screen. You see a lot of visual effects heavy films that don't have that feeling of that you want to believe in the characters. And you could take a film like The Abyss, where it's about, a divorced couple bickering in the middle of it. That relationship between the husband and wife is essential to the film. You could say Terminator 2 is about a mother protecting her son. All of these things are, True Lies is, a dysfunctional family, a husband and wife, and the husband is a spy. All of these things I think are really important to why he is who he is. It's that fact that we care about the characters are on screen, and that we, Jack and Rose, that if it had been about, like just a ship sinking, we wouldn't have cared about Titanic.
No, I completely agree.
Simon, how did you blend authentic cultural elements like Maori and Vanuatu voices and Na'vi language into Pandora's futuristic world? And how did Cameron's influence your approach?
Well, in this case, I wanted to have a different texture. One of the things that for this film, for the Sea Tribe, the Metkaina, who in Avatar 1, we had a forest tribe, the Omatikaya, and I had been responsible for the non-orchestral side of Avatar 1. So that textural process of the sort of glowing forest and so on, that had been my thing. I was the lead arranger on Avatar 1, which is one that, and on Avatar 2, I knew we had to come up with a different texture. And I looked at tribes, sea tribes and nomadic tribes around the world. And there was a different way of singing, and especially if you listen to some of the things in the Cook Islands and Vanuatu and some of the South Pacific Islands, they have a different vocal texture. And so I put together some of these singers from those islands. The one thing about New Zealand is you get access to them even when we were in the middle of we were in COVID, so it was difficult to get people in, but they were available. I could find some of them that could stay within New Zealand. And we had a wonderful vocal group that we recorded in Wellington that gave me that sort of soft, long vocal texture that is so much part of that Polynesian and South Pacific vocal thing. And it was a texture I wanted to use to show that this had a different feel to the way that we'd had a much edgier vocal sound in Avatar 1. And one of the things we had in Avatar 2 was a thing called Culture Club, which was a coherent approach in terms of the culture that we were dealing with. It was something that Jim would say, well, you can't just make stuff up. He may not have used the word stuff, but it was the idea was that we had to show parallels on Earth culture for things that we were doing. So that for instance, so there was me, there was the costume designer, there was the lead, the prop master, there was the production designer. And we would all work together in this room in a thing called Culture Club, where we would define the culture of the tribe and say how it should be. And it was something to make it feel so that it felt natural, and it felt as if we were thinking about it as a whole rather than us individually doing stuff. And that's the level of detail that we go to on Avatar, is that everything has to feel as if it was researched. The lyrics that I wrote for the song chords, I wrote those in Na'vi, in the language that they have on screen on Pandora, but I referenced ideas that I found in Apache Indian and South Pacific tribes not tribes, I'm not sure what the societies, where they had this idea that life was a spark, and then the spark becomes a light, and then you walk towards the midday, and then as you head towards your death, you are walking towards the sunset. And it was something that I needed to show that I had referenced different indigenous ideas on that. It sounds long-winded, it is, but it is something about the approach that we take, is that we want to say there's a reason why we do what we do on screen. You will see little things like, you will see things that Kate Winslet does on screen in Avatar 2 that were based on some things that a shaman from a South American tribe showed us on the way that they do healing ceremonies. And that's the sort of thing that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit on you personally for a moment. We've been talking a lot about your film work and production work, but you've also been involved in a lot of very interesting projects away from film. And I was wondering if you could talk about, like, for instance, the Pink Floyd project that you did. If you could talk to us about that, what it is and what your involvement was with that.
Yeah, so I have my other thing is the use of trying to find cutting edges in technology with sound and music. And one of the things I've been working on is use of 3D systems, especially in large scales, rather than just, not the sort of thing we get with headphones and Dolby Atmos, but some of the larger immersive systems. And Pink Floyd were doing this show called Their Mortal Remains, which was at the Victorian Albert Museum and then toured around the world. And it was a sort of retrospective on their life. And at the end of it, they wanted the audience to be able to immerse themselves in the music. So there was me and Simon Rhodes, a great engineer at Abbey Road, and Pink Floyd asked us to mix this stuff in a true three-dimensional space. And so we built a surround sound, and it's not surround, it's actual 3D. You can walk inside the music. We built a system in Abbey Road Studio 2, which is the Beatles studio for anybody who wants to know what that looks like. And in there, we had an array of speakers that were a big hemisphere with speakers high up. Some of them were like 6 or 7 yards above your head, and then all around you. And you could do things like, I remember mixing Comfortably Numb. And Comfortably Numb, you could do a thing where you could put hello, hello, hello. I put that above you, so right above you, so that you hear this disembodied voice talking to you from over your head. And you could do these things where you could make it so you could walk towards Dave Gilmour and hear more of his solo and get engaged with him, or you could walk to Rick Wright, or you could stand in the middle and hear Nick Mason's drums really clearly. It was a phenomenal job to be able to do. And we mixed a whole load of material, some of which ended up in Their Mortal Remains and maybe some of it may turn up in the future. I don't know, but we had an enormous amount of fun. I mean, things like Arnold Lane, we got to these were all with the original masters that Pink Floyd gave us. And so I was able to work with the multi-tracks for all of this material. It was a really special thing to be able to be involved with.
Yeah, I mean, when I read about that, I thought, I have to ask you about that, because it sounded like such an interesting and innovative project.
See, they were the first surround sound band. I mean, the original Dark Side of the Moon the original cut was in quadraphonic.
Quadraphonic, yeah.
So to be able to actually do a proper immersive surround sound where you could actually stand inside the music, I saw one of the hi-fi magazines said it was like the best sound they'd ever heard. And I don't disagree with them. I'm very proud of it.
Wow. Yeah, I wished I had seen that when it toured. I want to ask you, Simon, throughout your career or throughout your life, have there been any books or documentaries or films that you've seen that have been particularly inspiring to you, professionally speaking?
I can absolutely nail a couple of them. One would be, there's a documentary of Leonard Bernstein conducting West Side Story in New York with opera singers, with Kerry Takanawa and Jose Carreras, with this astonishing New York orchestra and band. It's just like everything you ever wanted to know about why you wanted to be in this business. It's a quite astounding thing. I was very lucky when I was young to go and see Leonard Bernstein conducting. And I can remember seeing him jumping up and down in joy, like he was conducting Beethoven's Ninth. And it was just a transformational thing to watch him conduct. And then to watch this documentary, and to see that level of care, that level of detail, but also that level of enthusiasm. And the fact that this hybrid of jazz and classical and pop, these amazing melodies. If I had to choose one piece of music in the 20th century, it would be West Side Story. I think it is like the whole of the 20th century in one piece of music. I think it's an astonishing thing.
Wow, it's so interesting you would say that, because I just finished, yesterday I was watching a documentary called Six by Sondheim. And he talks, it's a great documentary. It focuses on six of it's basically a documentary on his life. But what's so great about it is that you get his whole creative process. He talks about his creative process. And in the documentary, he talks extensively about, working on West Side Story and the composing. And he gives a lot of interesting history, that the show was originally a flop. It was the movie that made it so successful. Most people don't realize that the stage show was not really a hit, but when the movie came out, that's what made it the legendary classic that it is. But he talks about writing West Side Story, and he talks about working with the principals on that, and what they did. So it's interesting you mentioned that, since it's so fresh in my mind.
He was like 21 years old when he did that.
Yes, it was like the first big thing that he ever did, and it remains one of his great classics among many that he has written over the years.
I met him once. I went to his house and met him once, and it was, he was everything you hoped it would be. I never met Bernstein. There was a call I got once saying, we want to try and sell Lenny Bernstein a synclavier, and I was hoping I might have been asked to go and demo it to him, but that never happened. So, but Bernstein is one of those things that you just remembered that music is meant to have a joy to it and an excitement about everything in it. And I think that people sometimes lose sight of the fact that we're meant to have fun doing this.
Simon, what advice do you have for those listeners who want to pursue a career as a film composer? What would you tell them?
I would say that it is tougher now than it has ever been, and it was always tough. I think that you have to want to do it more than anything else, because if you don't want it more than anything else, there's somebody else out there. The colleges are turning out young composers. Everybody can write great music. And so that we all, you could give anybody a chance to write music to a major film and they'll do a great job. It's the psychology of working with your director. It's the psychology of working with your team, and also the adaptability. I think one of the things that I've learned is the ability to set my children free. And by that, I mean, I can throw away 10 pieces of music and not even think about it and just get on with number 11 and don't worry about the 10 previous versions that I've made of something. Because the film owns the music. You're writing music to support the film and to make it better. And the film tells you whether you're doing the job right. Sometimes for young composers, they write music that is great in itself. And then when you put the dialogue and you put the sound effects and put the visuals there, the music is trying to compete with it. And the idea is not to compete with the dialogue and the effects, it's to support it. Because your ear can only take so much. And the biggest mistake I see with young composers is they believe that they sometimes have to show off. I choose to show off when I have those small moments that where I get a chance to do something and there's not something else going on. You asked me about books that were important. I have Nelson Riddle wrote a fabulous book on arranging. And years and years and years ago, I was working with John Barry and he saw it. And John looked at it and went, "Oh, wow, I've never seen that. Can I have that?" And so I gave it to him. And I recently found a copy of it again and brought it back. And there's this wonderful line in it where Nelson Riddle, who was the great arranger of Frank Sinatra songs and things like that, and said, the first 6 bars and the last 6 bars are mine and everything else is Frank's. And so you can hear that when you hear these songs. You hear that ba ba da ba da ba 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 da da da, these huge enormous intros. And then the moment Frank opens his mouth, the arrangement just stays out of the way. And film music's a bit like that. The moment somebody opens their mouth, you stay out of the way.
I wanted to ask you, Simon, you mentioned about all the pieces of music that you've, thrown away or discarded because, you came up with something better. Have you ever gone back to revisit that stuff? And does it end up becoming a new breath of life with some of the pieces of music you've discarded?
Yeah. I mean, I've got 10 hours of demos on Way of Water.
Wow.
So we actually did assemble them and to look. And sometimes you sit there. Well, Jim Cameron has a phrase of picking over the bones on trying to find the flesh on the bone pile. Sometimes you go and you just go to the bone pile and the things that have been discarded and you see if there's any flesh left on the bones. So yes, that if I've had 10 hours of music that I've written and we've ended up with 3 hours in the film, then yeah, there's 7 hours where there may be some good stuff there and I'll try and find it.
Yeah, it's funny, when you mentioned Jim Cameron, because as I mentioned before, Terminator 2 was one of my favorite films, and he put out a special DVD edition, which was a new cut of the film, which added back 20 minutes of things that he had taken out of the original theatrical version. And, he put them all back in. And it's interesting because he has a commentary track where he talks about what you were saying, about how, certain things at the time, they perhaps don't suit the story, but, when you go back and sort of revisit all of that, it becomes a different perspective. I mean, certain filmmakers have done that. Francis Coppola did that with Apocalypse Now, where he went back and did a new edit where he added 45 minutes back into the picture, calling it Apocalypse, I think Redux, Apocalypse Now Redux. Yeah. Where, they almost become different kinds of movies. Actually, a film, I think you worked on Dances with Wolves. Costner did the same thing. There is a special DVD out there where he did a 4-hour edit. The movie was originally, the theatrical cut was 3 hours. There is a 4-hour edit that he put together about 5-6 years later on a special edition of the DVD. So it is interesting from that perspective.
I think it gives the audience a chance to see the choices we make. There is a thing that in the cinema you have to keep people, wanting, that you want to keep them eating their popcorn. They want to be sitting there going and stuck to their seats. And the 4-hour cut, sometimes, there are those moments where there is time to reflect that in the audience, in the cinema, when you've got a packed audience there, then you may lose their attention, and that's what you can't do in the cinema. Whereas at home, when you get to watch it, you can actually appreciate sometimes these longer versions in a new way. And I think that because we have the original cut, then seeing the new version gives us a different view, and I like those extended versions.
Yeah, I do too. It's interesting when you talk about length of cuts. You know, Jim's original cut, or the theatrical cut to Titanic, I think is 3 hours and 12 minutes. And, you know, I don't know anyone who's ever seen that movie that said, God, it was so long. You know, I have never once heard that comment for that movie. You know, when people talk about length of films, and that's a lot longer even than, like, you know, some of these like Marvel films at 2 hours and 45 minutes. No one has ever said that. So it's I think to his, you know, it's a compliment to him that he was able to have that much material over that scope of time, and nobody ever felt that this is too long or dragging.
When we were working on it, there was, I think the initial cut that we worked on was close to 4 hours long. Wow. And on Titanic. And there would be points where we were working on a scene and he'd come in and say, yeah, that's gone. And we go, but this is astonishing. This is amazing. And he would say, yeah, but it's gone. And you'd say, I remember talking to him once and saying, okay, so how much did that scene that you've just thrown away cost? And he said, I don't know, maybe $1 million. And he's able to be rigorous, you know, like ruthless with himself. And an editor needs to be. You need to be able to just turn around and look at your own work. I hope I'm that rigorous with the work that I write as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the expression is called kill your darlings. You know, it's some literary reference to that. Simon, where can people reach you? Is it through your website, through your agent? What's the best way?
I think probably the website is probably fine. We're updating the website shortly, but also through social media. I've got, you know, people do send me stuff through Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I've tended to have a fairly low profile. Maybe I'll be a little bit more public in the year to come.
Wonderful. Simon, we cannot thank you enough for this.
Thank you.
Really, I mean, it's been a fascinating and insightful conversation, and we're very, very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Rich, Eric, it's been great to talk to you both, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you. This, Eric, was a masterclass in what the actual world of film composing and I mean, not only the composing part, but everything that goes into that process involves not only creatively, but the challenges of not having any money, what you need to do, how you react to those situations, and how working with certain kinds of leaders, in this case, Jim Cameron, are so important. I loved how he emphasized how Cameron cared about every single deep detail of the project, you know, making the process very creatively fulfilling for all involved, you know, and Cameron is known for that. He's legendary for taking that kind of approach where he's not only caring about every process, but he's also extremely innovative, inventing technology, which he did on Titanic, which he did on Avatar.
Terminator, all of these movies.
All of these. Yeah. The technology didn't exist. When you watch Terminator 2, for example, a lot of the technology used in that for those effects did not exist. The whole thing of when that, you know, when the liquid, and when the guard comes up out of the floor, and you know that was like revolutionary in its time, as was Avatar, as was Way of Water. I mean, all of these things, and that's the level of commitment that Cameron is operating on and expects everyone else to as well.
Yeah, I also thought him starting out, you know, with programming, how he was working as a programmer at SARM Studios, learning a lot from being a part of Trevor Horn's team. And, you know my take with Trevor Horn. He's a genius and just all the work that he has done. And it was very exciting to talk to Simon about that process because, as you know, Trevor's been involved with just some seminal records. We talked about, 90210, A Big Generator, you know, all the Seal records, which are just, in my book, they're literally masterpieces on their own. And so, again, you know, it's one of these things where you get somebody like Simon, and I guess the whole theme of this episode is just about excellence and how people strive for that, like a Jim Cameron, and like a Simon Franglen, and, you know, like a Trevor Horn, that the whole running theme is just excellence all the way through.
Yeah, it's a commitment to a way of life that is, you know, looking at things from that perspective, not settling, not settling, but going for the best that something can be and seeing the results of that in terms of the projects that we're talking about. I mean, these are masterpieces and cultural touchstones that we have in terms of music, in terms of their impact, and in terms of cinema.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at mubutv.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.